Rodrigo, why don't they create a category with the old Formula One cars from last year, for example, which no one is using anymore, racing outside the season, on weekends when there are no races, and in doing so, giving a chance to those who don't actually race in the main category? That's a great idea. And it's already happened twice. That's right. It's about parallel Formula One and off-season Formula One. I'll tell you the name we're going to talk about today on Splash and Go in just a moment. Let's go. But first, this video is sponsored by Surfshark, the best VPN service, our longtime partner here, for anyone who needs data security while browsing. And yes, I need it. You need it. Everyone needs it. And if everyone used it, we'd definitely have fewer scams on the internet, because every time you transmit information, what does it mean to transmit information? Watching this video is transmitting information. Doing a search, checking the price of a plane ticket, a hotel, logging into your online banking, browsing around, checking Instagram using the public Wi-Fi at that bookshop, that cafe, or the airport. All of that is transmitting data. And when you do it unprotected, you run the risk of being caught by malicious hooks. Surfshark encodes, scrambles, and encrypts your information so it travels securely to the recipient and back to your device, any device. Desktop, mobile, tablet, games console, smartphone, it doesn't matter. Did I mention laptop? Laptop as well. The interface is fast, attractive, easy to use. You don't even need a tutorial. Every day we hear about scams, data leaks, and so on. And you, by using Surfshark, can even be alerted about this. If your data is leaked, they also have a service that notifies you. And for our crowd, it's cheaper here on the channel, because if you sign up for Surfshark using my code, also via this QR code, with a fixed link in the first comment and in the video description, you get access to an exclusive offer and immediately start browsing securely. Go through my link or use my QR code so the sponsor knows it works. Everyone helps each other out. I'm setting you up for a goal, so do me this favor too. Deal? That's it. Then, this video is supported by Surfshark, QR code on the screen. Let's keep going. We all know these days that the Formula One calendar is huge. There are 24 races in a year that has 52 weeks. So, 40% of weekends have Formula One. When I started watching, back in '88, little Rodrigo used to watch 16 races a year. So, since then, we've had a 50% increase, adding 8 more to the original 16, reaching the current 24. And yes, there's still a heated debate about whether the calendar should get even bigger. Can you believe it? Well, it's all about the money. But there was a time when things weren't like this. The very first Formula One championship in 1950 had just 7 rounds. And back in the 60s and 70s, there were between 12 and 14, only reaching 15 for the first time at the start of the 80s. The calendar avoided the European winter, with races concentrated between March and November, and they only raced in other places like Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, South Africa, Watkins Glen, and in Canada at Motorsport as well. If they could schedule these races at both ends of the calendar, precisely to race there when it was too cold in Europe, right at the start and right at the end of the year. There were weather issues, and also plenty of weekends without Formula One. Besides the fact that the teams are businesses that need to pay their bills, this created both a need and an opportunity, because after all, each year some cars became outdated. They were no longer used, but they were still marvelous machines, Formula One cars that had been left behind, but were still far ahead of the rest. And there were plenty of people keen to watch them race, as well as plenty of people eager to drive them. That's why today I'm telling you the story of 2 categories that used Formula One cars. Between 1964 and 1975, there was the Tasman series, which raced in Oceania and got its name from the Tasman Sea that separates New Zealand from Australia. Down in that corner of the map, the locals call Down Under. The creation of the category thus combined the climatic opportunity, being in the southern hemisphere, with a climate similar to ours at a time when it was very cold at the start of the year, precisely in the Old World. The races took place in January, February, and the very beginning of March, which was, well, coincidence or not, exactly the off-season for Formula One. For the drivers at the time, let's remember that the economic model of things was a bit different, and the teams raced for the appearance fee, although that's still the case today, and the drivers didn't receive a salary. Sometimes they only got the prize money, so if they didn't race, they didn't get paid. And suddenly, then, during the off-season, there were races happening over in New Zealand and Australia. It was also very good for the promoters, who managed to organize a championship where Formula One, at the time, still hadn't arrived. There was no Australian Grand Prix. There was no New Zealand Grand Prix. Also, due to logistical difficulties, the series then became a kind of winter Formula One, or summer Formula One, depending on your point of view. If you're talking from the European perspective, it was happening over there in Oceania. The idea emerged in the early 60s with the organization of independent races. But soon the local promoters thought, what if we bring all this together into a championship with points at stake? Tie all the races together and then pool more money to bring over the big names from Europe. In 1964, the Tasman Cup was then formalized, a formula that allowed single-seater cars with engines up to 2.5 liters, precisely the engines that Formula One used. The whole thing quickly took off, and some very familiar names to us started showing up there. Jim Clark, Jackie Stewart, Graham Hill, Phil Hill, John Surtees, Johan Rindt, who would go there to race and take on a local crowd that was no pushovers. Jack Brabham, Bruce McLaren, Chris Amorn, Denny Hume. And things really heated up in these races. And as for the circuits, I have to admit, I'd never even heard of them. Because, you know, in Australia we've always seen Formula One races, at least on street circuits like Adelaide and Melbourne, but these ones here are Puco Park in New Zealand, Leven also on the island, Wigram Aerodrome, which is an airport in New Zealand, Taronga Park also in New Zealand, Sandown Park in Australia, and Longford also in Australia. This is a 7.2-kilometer street circuit, and in 1964, for example, Bruce McLaren won there driving a Cooper. In 65, it was Jim Clark's turn. That was the year Jim Clark won everything. Formula One, Formula 2, the Indianapolis 500, and then he went to the other side of the world and cleaned up there as well. In 66, Jackie Stewart won with a BRM, and in 67 and 68, it was Jim Clark again. That last title was won just months before he lost his life at Hockenheim in a Formula 2 car. In 69, local driver Chris Amorn took the win with Ferrari. Chris Amorn, who never won a Grand Prix that counted for Formula One, but had victories elsewhere and also won this championship. And then, from 1970 onwards, the championship changed format and became Formula 5000, still with single-seater cars, but now with 5-liter engines. And do you know who won the championships in 71, 72, and 73? A certain Graham McRae, uncle of Colin McRae, the rally legend. Can you believe it? But the Tasman series wasn't the only parallel Formula One. As I mentioned at the start of this video, we also had a national Formula One in England. The Aurora Formula, officially known as the British Formula One Championship, in other words, an English Formula One Championship, took place between 1978 and 1982, and the reasoning, opportunity, and need behind it were basically the same, with one difference. They didn't race out of season, but rather on alternate weekends to Formula One, precisely to avoid any clashes. It followed the traditional European calendar, that is, from March to October, and was seen by British constructors as a way to monetize cars on which they had spent a lot of money, but which, due to the professionalization of Formula One, started to become outdated very quickly. Because if you look at the history of Formula One from 1950 to 1975, it was common for teams to use cars for several years, simply making updates as they went along. There are several cases like this. The Lotus 72, for example, had versions A, B, C, and D. The one with Emerson's title was further developed into E and F. Ferrari came out with the 312, which became the 312 PB, then the 312T with a transverse gearbox, and then there were the T1, T2, T3, T4, and T5. The same thing happened with Brabham cars and so on. But the cars kept getting more and more expensive to build and lasting less and less time. Nowadays, as we know, it's practically unthinkable for a Formula One team to race with the same car, and when it does happen, it's under extreme circumstances. For example, Haas, from 2020 to 2021, didn't spend a penny on the car, making only the bare minimum changes to keep it within the regulations. But there was a purpose behind that, and it ended up working out for the team, which scored a lot of points in 2022. So, the Aurora formula ended up working for them in several ways, allowing these cars to run for longer. It also served as a sort of breeding ground for young drivers, giving a chance to those they thought might have talent, but wanted to test outside the pressure and need for results that comes with Formula One itself. It was also an opportunity for the so-called gentleman drivers, or old boys with boats, to race by paying, because in Formula One it was becoming increasingly difficult to get a spot just with money. The name Aurora came from the main sponsor, a toy company, and the races took place on tracks we know from the junior categories, Formula 3 and Formula Ford, like Smeaton, Oulton Park, and Thruxton, as well as the well-known Silverstone and Brands Hatch. As I mentioned, the category gave opportunities to those who were still knocking on Formula One's door, couldn't find a seat, and preferred to let these drivers mature away from the spotlight. For example, the Chilean Eliseo Salazar raced there. Remember him? The one who got a thrashing from Nelson Piquet at Hockenheim, David Kenny, Tiff Needell, Tony Trimmer, Rupert Keegan, Emilio de Villota, and Desiree Wilson, who won a race in Formula Aurora. With that, she became the only woman to win a form of Formula One, even if not in the World Championship. This happened in 1980 with a Theodore car, but the championship lasted until 1982, when it was won by Jim Crawford in an Ensign. Soon, only familiar names to us. And in the previous year, 1981, it didn't take place due to a lack of interest. Sometimes things went wrong. Some familiar faces also passed through there, like Ricardo Londono, the one with those very strange connections to the Medellin cartel that I mentioned in the video about shady sponsors, and countless other characters, such as Geoff Brabham, for example, brother of David Brabham, whom we interviewed here, and son of Black Jack, as well as Elio de Angelis. As I mentioned, it was used to develop talent. De Angelis was a hell of a driver. So why did Formula Aurora come to an end if it worked, attracted crowds, developed drivers, and helped teams financially? Well, there are a few reasons. The first is that Formula One didn't really like the idea of not having exclusivity over those marvelous cars, because if you had Formula One and then another series that was more or less the same, even if the cars were a bit outdated, but still racing on alternate weekends, you have to agree with me. It's like, oh, I missed Formula One, but next week there's Formula Almost One. And then Formula One started putting pressure on the teams that raced with them, like, get out of this Aurora Formula business. You're getting in my way, and I'll get in yours. To encourage drivers to mature in a place that looked more like a feeder series or a junior category, they gave it a better image. Formula 2, which would later become Formula 3000, then turn into GP2, and nowadays is called Formula 2 again. Furthermore, now with the support of the FIA, Formula 1 once again got a helping hand from the federation, which started to say, I won't grant a super license to anyone coming from Formula Aurora. It doesn't count as prior experience. So, the drivers who used Formula Aurora to gain track time said, well, if it doesn't count anymore, I'm not going to spend that money to race there. So yes, once again, Formula One ended up getting in the way of anyone who might have been a threat to them at some point. You know how it is. But did you know about the history of these two categories? Formula Almost One, or why not, the Tasman series and Formula Aurora? Leave your comment below. This was another episode of Splash and Go on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like, it's free. Costs you nothing. You know that, and it really helps the channel. And don't forget to leave your rip as well. Likes, comments, and rips are the fuel for the channel so that YouTube keeps spreading our content across the internet. On the way to 300,000 subscribers. So you don't miss out on anything we do here, we have notification channels Instagram, Telegram, and WhatsApp, all of them with over 2,000 members each, receiving automatic notifications as soon as we publish any content. Finally, we have our social media, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, and TikTok. The handles are showing down here. I'll see you in the next videos. Thanks, and a big hug.